I've been sitting in on the galleries with the base budget discussions, and it's multifaceted, talking about possibly letting prisoners out early, health and human services, lots of cuts there, higher education. What is your strategy? How are you going to push back on this? Are you focusing on one area over the other? Because they really hit so many areas. Where do you think you have the best chance of restoring money to some of those issues?
I can make a comment if you like. Yesterday in our social services appropriations, there is a pot of money to be found that I think would be useful, and I made a motion yesterday that we would use that money that's been outlined by staff and fund the top 27 items that were prioritized. Now, I think by doing that, it put a line in the sand by which, here's what's important to us. And so, and then also to use this money. We made a motion in our committee that we would have access, Health and Human Services would have access to the endowment fund. And in appropriations, executive appropriations yesterday, the chairs mentioned that. And so that was part of the strategy that we had yesterday, that in fact some of those really difficult areas that are, transportation for people with disabilities that can't get to daycare and so forth, those kinds of things, respite care, those sorts of things that really can't afford to get cut, will in fact get funded.
I was in the meeting today but not yesterday, so which endowment fund are you talking about?
It is the state endowment fund. 40% of that comes from the tobacco settlement fund.
Okay.
So some of that is ongoing money. About 15 million of that would be ongoing money. And then there's another fund, TANF, moving to the social services block grant. So that's about $2.3 million that would be available. All in all, we had about $16 million available to us. And so by taking that $16 million, we went down the priority list as low as we could go. We made a few changes in the priorities. And it seems like the chairs were pretty willing to accept that. And I think actually those are the ones that we will target, and that the rest of them will go along with it.
Let me say this just more generally, though. We are relatively in agreement with the way the governor has presented his budget and the gradual way that he would close the structural imbalance. And so I think some of the no votes you've seen out of the Senate have basically been predicated on the fact we don't think that we need to be starting off the session with cuts. We think that there is, it's better for the community to understand that our economy is getting better. We are running a surplus currently, and so we do have a structural imbalance, but that can be corrected over the course of a year or two. We also have quite a few dollars available to us in one-time money, setting aside new opportunities like having the income tax paid quarterly, or increasing the gas tax, or other things that could bridge budget structural imbalances. And so I think that from a starting point, we think that these cuts at 7% are unnecessary, and we agree. And I will also note that it was just a few short months ago that Ron Bigelow was sitting in our chairs, and now he's with the governor's office. And even he has recognized the value of the governor's budget, because you haven't seen him make changes. So he's someone that's very familiar with the process, very engaged in having put budgets together before in years past, and he hasn't made any changes to the governor's budget. And so I think that that's an important tell that this is probably a process that's causing more concern and angst in the community than is necessary.
Some of those ideas that you've talked about in the past, like income tax paid quarterly, that's come up year after year after year. You talked about, analyzing income tax incentives for corporations. But as the Senate President said, unless those take the form of a bill, there's really no debate. Are Democrats planning on sponsoring a bill to look at revenue enhancements?
I think that those are ideas we have until Thursday to open those bill files. So part of what we're doing is socializing the concept. Is there an appetite for this in light of where the current budget is? Now, I'll point out, again, there's one-time money available to us, and so I'm not sure that it requires a bill, but there certainly needs to be more to the conversation than the cuts, which is where we've only started and where we seem to be ending. I also think it's important to recognize that these cuts have come for the last 2 years, had a pretty dramatic effect on providing state services. So this is not just something that they've decided, and this is the first year for the concern. Maybe Representative Litvak has a comment on that also.
What was the question? let me say, I walked in, and I apologize. We just got done on the House floor, so I apologize for walking in late. Let me say one thing. The question that you asked about income tax credits, or tax credits and tax exemptions, it's not just a revenue question. That also is an accountability question. And at some point, we will be prepared to talk about some legislation that will be coming from our caucus to address accountability measures for tax expenditures, to make sure that, just like we're doing with all levels of the budget, holding our public expenditures accountable, we are doing this as well. There are bill files as well to address some of the revenue issue. But I want to, and again, walking in late, we just got done voting and the House passing the base budget bills for all but public and higher education, because those will be given the Senate. And Democrats were united in opposition for these base budget bills, both because of the level of cuts that they represent and the types of cuts, so the consequences of the cuts, both to the community, to state employees, because the conversation is completely one-sided, as Senator Romero said, that we're not considering the whole picture, but also because we disagree that we need to start here. The goal at this point has been, and I'm starting to sound a bit like a broken record, the goal at this point has been the elimination of the structural deficit. That it should not be our goal to putting together the budget this year. That is not fiscally responsible, it is not fiscally sound policy, and it will do more damage in the long run. And it is definitely not common sense.